So, interestingly enough, the recent Hebdo murders in Paris targeting journalists and even more egregiously without cause Jews at a kosher market represent uniquely Islamic phenomena, certainly in the present era. Blasphemy killings and lethal religiously inspired Muslim Jew hatred. Islam's prophet had his own Dead Poets Society comprised of mockers whose assassinations he directly ordered or sanctioned, at least 10 explicit cases, including prominently Jews. A canonical hadith or tradition of Muhammad states, for example, a Jewess used to abuse the prophet and disparage him. A man strangled her till she died. The apostle of Allah declared that no recompense was payable for her blood. The scholarly Muslim translation of this hadith informs us Jews or any non-Muslim who insults Islam's prophet should also be killed per all the major schools of Islamic law. Apropos to our discussion, the Khomeini-era Iranian regime, dating back to its seizure of power before the 1989 Salman Rushdie affair, has spearheaded this Islamic assault on freedom of speech via nonviolent attempts to alter human rights instruments and murderous violence. Iran's ongoing global campaign to enact and enforce traditional Sharia Islamic law per blasphemy reveals an essential aspect of its worldview, a totalitarian Sharia-compliant vision for humanity. The directed murderous assault on Parisian Jews is also consistent with Iran's own Islamic Jew hatred. Islamic jihadism and Jew hatred, a Shiite Iranian legacy not of the last 35 years, but the last 500 in turn, explain Iran's relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons for the express purposes of destroying the Jewish state of Israel and defeating the U.S. so the Islamic Republic can fulfill its hegemonic aspirations. There are three motivational pillars in terms of this relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons and regional and then more global hegemony. And that's jihad, which is a permanent institution of conquering warfare. It's enshrined literally in the Iranian constitution. Najis, which is something we can maybe talk about later, it's a really odious doctrine of the physical and spiritual impurity of the infidel. And of course, canonical Islamic Jew hatred. This comes, unfortunately, from Islam's core texts, the Quran, the Hadith, and the earliest Muslim biographies of Muhammad. A very Persianophilic scholar, Brown, wrote in 1906, the Mujtahids, these are very learned Muslim scholars, and the Mullah, more local level preachers, are a great force in Persia and concern themselves with every department of human activity, from the minutest detail of personal purification to the largest issues of politics. That's no different than what we're seeing today. Iran's current attitudes toward Israel mirror its treatment of Iranian Jewry during the Safavid Qajar eras. It was a very, very brutally oppressive administration of the Sharia, rife with all kinds of virulent anti-Semitism. Areas of Iran, I had never seen this word outside of a European context, were literally rendered Judenrein in periodic pogroms that took place throughout this entire period. Just to give you pause, if we compare Khomeini to Ayatollah Montazeri, who's felt to be the Green Movement spiritual leader, we see really no difference in terms of their attitudes about jihadism, and it's based on the prototype of Muhammad, who was a conqueror. And I think this is also very important to realize going forward. The evolution of jihad doctrine, again, took place centuries ago. It's been revitalized. But all the principles that we see currently enshrined in the Iranian regime can be vividly illustrated if one studies the period of these two dynasties, of these two Shiite, Twelver, theocratic dynasties. And again, to cut to the chase, if we look at the jurist Al-Amili, who died in 1622, he simply says, jihad against followers of other religions, such as Jews, is required unless they convert to Islam or pay the poll tax. You can see these abhorrent listings of all the measures that were imposed upon the Jews repeatedly, as expressed again by Al-Amili. Then we can see the effects of these jurisdictions on the Jews by travelers that passed through Iran well into the 19th century. And I'll just really, as a summary, give you the observations of Claude Annett, who actually was an interesting fellow. That was his That was his writing name. He was actually Jean Chauffeur. He also published a travelogue called Through Persia in a Motor Car, and it recounts his first-hand observations from 1905, and he's talking specifically about the plight of Iran's Jews. He says, living in the midst of a fanatical and hostile population, Jews in Persia are reduced to the last extremity of degradation. Nearly all trades are forbidden to them. Everything they touch, again, this Najis idea, is considered defiled. There is very little justice in Persia for anybody. For the Jews, there is none at all. Every possible exaction is practiced on them. Nobody takes their part, and they live in appalling poverty, while their moral and physical degradation is beyond description. It is a point of Islamic law that the Muslims will not make a treaty unless they're in a weaker position so that they can strengthen themselves, and it goes back to how Muhammad dealt with the Quraysh tribe of Mecca. The Najis doctrine has been reinvigorated in Iran. It is Ayatollah Montazeri, unfortunately, again, the Green Movement, spiritual godfather. This is Ayatollah Montazeri refusing to shake the hand of a Najis Jew, as the Farsi caption tells us, because it would make him impure as he's about to engage in his prayers. The Shiite luminary Allama Tabatabai, he is, how do we describe this? The leading clerical inspiration for Shiism itself. He says, commenting on a specific Quranic verse, Quran 582, he says, the Jews, although they had the same alternatives as the Christians, and they could retain their religion with payment of the jizya, the Quranic poll tax, yet they continued in their haughtiness, became harder in their bigotry, and turned to double dealing and deception. They broke their covenants, eagerly waited calamities to befall the Muslims, and dealt to them the bitterest deal. The enmity of the Jews toward the divine religion, Islam, and their sustained arrogance and bigotry have continued exactly in the same manner even after the Prophet Muhammad. And so there's a centrality of Jew hatred in this doctrine. It is why there's this obsessive impulse to destroy Israel. It's something that we need to come to terms with. Yes, there's this theology also about end of times. Again, we're seeing these endless calls of annihilation of Israel straight across the line, from Khomeini right through Rouhani. This is just the first step on a global jihad. Thank you very much.